Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Jennifer White, sitting in for Stephen Henderson. On this Father's Day, we're taking time to talk about the important role of African American fathers in our communities. How can Black men have better relationships with their children? How do we break the stereotypes surrounding Black fatherhood? And what is the status of the Black family? There's a new book that's providing some answers to these questions. Black Fatherhood, Reclaiming Our Legacy, offers tips on how to become a successful African-American family man and role model. The book was written by Dr. Curtis Ivery, the Chancellor of Wayne County Community College District, and his son, Marcus. I'm pleased to have Dr. Ivery as my guest today. Welcome to American Black Journal.
Good morning, Jennifer, and thank you for having me.
Tell me about why you think this book is necessary right now.
Well, I certainly think that the family ought to be the centerpiece for how we move forward. Anything that good comes out of a solid, structured family. It's not to suggest that mothers don't do a good job, because, I mean, history would surely suggest that they have. Mothers would stand in front of a train for their children. But fathers play a very special role. It's something as simple as teaching our young son to throw a baseball. It's something as simple as learning to shave by watching your father model that. It's the work ethic that sometimes one gets from watching one father get up every morning. I certainly, for me, that as I look back and think about my journey, my life, my father was a very important aspect, and it's something that I wanted to talk about and share, and it's just a project that took off because I had my son working with me. So that was, it's just a very important topic and conversation.
Were there things you were seeing in the way Black fatherhood in particular is viewed, or trends that you were seeing with Black families that were troubling to you, and is this book a response to that?
I think that the numbers speaks volumes. When we think about the fact that roughly more than 50% of the households are fatherless, and when that happens within our community, when that happens, we are looking at concentrated poverty, and what comes out of concentrated poverty, poor education oftentimes, for too much a presence in the criminal justice system, a lack of health care, a lot of important issues that are not positive come out of that experience of not, when the father's not at home. So I felt that it was something that needed to be talked about. I don't know that what I've talked about or what I'm trying to do in terms of a conversation would ultimately have will represent an outcome that we all want to see achieved. But at the end of the day, we're talking about it and we're having a conversation. And I don't think there's anyone I know that would suggest somehow that the father is not important in the home.
One thing I've noticed in popular culture is the language around fatherhood has changed. This term baby daddy that has become so popular, unfortunately. There's been a minimizing of that role.
Right. It's a fairly loose connotation.
Yeah.
It doesn't suggest the importance of the father in the home.
Why do you think that happened?
I don't know that I have the answer to that. I know that sometimes the fathers don't get the credit. There are fathers who are doing a lot of things right. There are fathers at home. However, oftentimes we hear the other end of it. We hear the stories about the fathers who are not there. But I think that we should also celebrate and applaud those fathers who are there. But I think you're always going to be better as a whole when the mother and father are in place. So I don't, but to talk about, I mean, we could talk about a history of where mothers have had to play the major role within the household. We could talk about underemployment or lack of employment for the Black male. We could talk about a poor educational system across the country in large urban centers that somehow has played a very it's been a very devastating story when we talk about our school systems across the country in many instances. But I suppose we could list a number of things that would underscore why this topic is important.
So, as you were writing the book, uh, what began to emerge for you about what shapes a positive African American father?
Well, I continued to have a vision of my own father, and it was the small things. The whole issue of truth telling, the ability to have strength, the ability to, or him telling me that relationships are important, the importance of working hard, giving a project 110%. It's not that we don't hear those stories from my mother, but to hear it as a young man from your father and have that father figure, I don't think it's almost irreplaceable. It's just got to come, I believe, from the father. Those kinds of stories and the kind of leadership that they present.
Now, the book is about being a strong African American father, but also role model, because there may be instances where a child needs someone to step into that role for them. So talk about the role African American men can play outside of maybe formal or biological fatherhood.
Well, I think that knowing and understanding that the father is a protector, so if you're the protector in your home, thus you become a protector in your community. It is a village concept, and somehow we have to embrace all of the young children, particularly the young male. We have to be out front, and they have to see and feel the success pieces that we're about every day, particularly in leadership roles. I've learned more from working with my children and watching my children, and particularly now as a grandparent. While I've led them, they lead me. They've taught me how to live. They've taught me how to learn, and they taught me how to love. I've been a better person because of them. I wouldn't say that I was a perfect father, but I'm a much better grandfather, because I know and I realize now the mistakes that I made as a father. So it's very difficult to be a perfect parent. But it's something about having a father at home. We sleep better at night. We just feel that the doors are locked, the windows are locked, and you just feel safe. And I'm probably absent of the father. Now, even at a young age, without the father, now you become the man. If you're 8 years old, you're 9 years old, you become the man in the house. And that's not all bad, but it certainly makes a difference knowing that the father's in place in a real way.
You wrote this book with your son, Marcus, who we hoped could be here today, but he's under the weather, so we're sorry he couldn't be here. Talk about that experience of writing a book about fatherhood with your son. I would imagine that was a time for you to reflect on your relationship.
You know, and I discovered that he's probably, number one, much brighter than I am. But the generational differences and how we talked about things, for example, corporal punishment rather, our attitudes about handling various situations, and but I also was amazed at how much he had been able to take in terms of what I had shared with him over the years, and how in many ways he mimicked some of the attitudes that I embrace to this very day. So that was probably the most interesting thing about the relationship. I mean, about sharing the book, the experience of writing the book, how much alike we are in many ways, and yet different.
Yeah, yeah. Ultimately, when people see a book about fatherhood, they may assume that it is a book for men. But who do you hope reads this book?
I would like for everyone to read the book. And you know, one of the things that came out of it for me was that I recognized at the end of the day that mothers are still important. Even in my household, my mother was a force. I would much rather for my father to distribute the discipline than my mother. My mother was very tough. I learned she made a difference, and she was a strength. We kind of rallied around her. So as we wrote about the book, as we talked about the father, we had to come to terms with the fact that mothers are just hugely important. And while we may be able to survive without the father, we're not going to ever survive without the mother. I just think the mother we have a natural bond with the mother as a child.
When you think about how the role of fatherhood has changed, I think back to the sitcom Dad from the 1950s, perhaps, bringing home the check, and that was sort of the role. It was as a financial provider. How would you describe fatherhood today?
Well, while there have been parts, I mean, there was a period when we understood the part about being a protector, but maybe now we understand that it's about our legacy. It's about the promoter. It's about the family name. It's about my father saying to me that I had to remember, as I'm out in the community behaving, that I had to remember that I was an Ivery. And so I think that has become something that we're coming back to and we're hearing more about. It's just that somehow what we leave behind is so important, and it's always about the legacy, and it's about what we do as parents, and particularly as a father today. So to suggest that it's changed, probably not a lot. I think we're just talking about it more, and certainly fathers were at home in larger numbers 25, 30 years ago. This change, this paradigm shift has been rather recent, I think, in terms of seeing the fathers leave home probably, if we look at the research, probably somewhere in the early 60s. The breakdown of the family really started within the Black community.
Well, Dr. Ivery, congratulations on the book. I look forward to reading it, and a happy Father's Day to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.